Hello guys, welcome back to another Python tutorial. And today we are gonna learn more integers and float. We are gonna learn about this type function. Okay, so let's get started on the video. 1 minute. Okay, so first we have this variable right here, exchange rate. So we're gonna make a variable exchange rate here. Then we're gonna print the value of the exchange rate right here. So the value of exchange rate is 1.883. So what will it print? 1.83. Then next we are going to print the type of this exchange rate. What is the type of the exchange rate? It's a float, right? So there's no short form for float, so it will come as float. So it will name class float. Okay, so I think this works. Come 1 minute. When we hover it like this, sometimes it comes like class float and also, so we can just go to that class. So no worries, we cannot go right now, so it's not a part of the video, so leave it aside. Okay, so I hope you have understood this. Now let's move on to the next one. So we have a variable again here, int value. We have an integer value right here, which is 1. So we have a string value which is 1.5. But how is it a string? Because there are single quotes here. So it's a string. Okay? It's not an integer. It's not a float or an integer. It's a string. But if we remove these, then it's a float. Okay? So we are gonna wrap it around again and okay. Now next, float to value is equal to float int value. So this int value, integer value is 1, right? So what will be the float value? Float value, we are making a variable, and there is this variable right here, int value, there is 1, right? So we are gonna so this basically means float 1 minute, float float 1, because int value right here is 1, so it basically means float 1 right here. So what does this do? If it is an integer, then what it basically does is put a point and then add a 0, so it's a float now, right? So it basically changes it into a float 1.0. Okay, now we're going to print integer value as a float. Integer value as a float is float value right here. Float value, we are going to print out this variable, means float 1. We're going to print like this out. Okay, actually guys, this is not actually needed. I just wrote it for your reference. Okay, int value as a float is 1.0, means int float value right here. Wait, let me make it easier. Okay, so so float value right here is float. We're going to make this int value 1 a float. So how do we do that? We are just putting 1 point and 0, then it's a float. So to do that, we can just write float, and inside brackets we can write the variable or the number. Okay, I hope you are understanding what I'm saying. And next, print integer value as a float. So we are going to print this variable. So if we don't run this, then this will just be a variable, it will not print anything. Okay, so when we are going to print, we're going to print this, print integer value as a float, then float value. This you notice this comma, we're going to print the float value. But if we put plus right here, then it would be an error, because we cannot add float and an integer. So I have not 1 minute, I don't think it will run. See, we cannot this is just adding these two, so we are just gonna print like this with a comma. Oh, one minute. I'll just press the debug one. Okay. So first integer value as a float is 1.0. As I said, it will put point 0 and print it out. Then we're gonna print the type of the float value. So it's a float. Okay, because this float value, inside this float value, it's basically 1.0, so it's a float. Okay, now we'll leave these variables aside, and so that we can use them. And so float value is equal to float string value. So we have this float value right here. We're going to modify this float value. Okay, so this is not redefining, we are redefining it, or we can just edit it. Okay, so it's just called redefining it. So we can redefine this is equal to float, but it will make change in this float value. In over here, if I print this float value, then what we're gonna get is it's, yeah, 1.0, right? But now after after this, we are going to modify this. Then we are going to print this out again. Flow flow 1 minute, float value right here, and we're going to run this. And in the first one it comes 1.0 because the value of it is 1.0 right here, and we have printed it. And after that we're changing the value to 1, then we're printing the value again, so it's 1. Okay, this was just for the for your reference that we can change values. So next, now float value is equal to float string value. We're going to make the string value, which here, string value here. Okay, so float value and string. I'm gonna copy this and erase this one here, and yeah. So see here, class dot so okay, leave this aside. String value is equal to 1.5 right here. So as I said, when we are making an integer from a string, if this is 1 and we are going to make it an integer, we can write int right here, and then we can write the variable, right? So what we're going to do now is we're going to like print the float value of it. Okay, so we are going to make it a float. So this, it will do the same thing, but it will do the same thing, it will remove these quotes, but it has to be a float if we remove the string, if we remove the quotes. So is this a float? Yes, indeed it's a float. So this will work out. Okay, so this can be any value. Okay, so it's not important that you post 1.5 or something. So 1. So string value as a float is this one as a modified. So okay, string value as float 1.5, string value right here. Okay, float value is equal to float string value. So we are going to make this string right here a float by removing these quotes. Okay, then we are going to print string value as a float is float value means 1.5. So we're going to print the type of float value, and it becomes class float. So but if we don't change this string, str is for string. Okay, we are changing this into string. It's already a string, so I've not tried this before. Yeah, string, it does not change anything. Okay, so we're going to print string value as a string, and then then the float value variable. You can name this variable anything. So string value it will still print as 1.5 as before, because it will not show these codes. But when we print the type of this, the which type it is, it always comes string, because it is a string. We have not changed it. But if we print float, then string value as a string, oh, not string, float, because just for reference. Okay, so string value as a float is 1.5, but when we print the type of it, it always comes class float, because it is a float, because we have removed these quotes, and now it's a float. Okay guys, I hope you have understood this one, these all. And don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.